All right, by a 5-4 vote, the Supreme Court said today the Trump administration's new transgender military policy can stay in place for now. Okay, on one side, there are claims the Pentagon's approach amounts to prejudice. On the other, it's about what David talked about, that battlefield lethality idea. So let's bring in two folks to talk about it. Fox News contributor Richard Fowler and retired gunnery sergeant, senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research, Jessie Jane Duff. Great to have both of you with us tonight.
Good to be here, Shannon.
Okay, so let me read some of the reaction. Not happy about this policy being upheld by the Supreme Court. And again, not on the merits, just that it's going to be allowed to play out while the case on the merits plays out. The American Psychological Association says this, their president, transgender people are currently serving in uniform with no adverse impact on military readiness or unit cohesion, and there is no research to the contrary. Jessie.
Well, right now, the ban does not prevent the current people that are in place, and it does have conditions for waivers. What is the biggest issue at stake was that transgenders were wanting to have surgery while on active duty and transition while on active duty. That put them in a non-deployable status. You cannot join the military if you're non-deployable. We have a multiple thousands of medical issues that prevent people from enlistment. And if you're going to allow one group to come in and have surgeries and go through transition, what about other groups? What about other groups with cancer? What about those with high blood pressure? What about those maybe with flat feet? What about eczema? You're going to open the doors that if you allow one group to receive this special treatment, what about the other treatments? The needs of the military actually outweigh the needs of the individual. And that is a common practice in employment law. When you look at the disparity there, that you can't hold the military to the same employment standards because discrimination in the military is very much based upon your mental, physical, and aptitude tests. And if you can't meet all those standards, you have to across the board be fair with that treatment.
Yeah, and in private employment, I mean, there are all kinds of things like the Americans with Disabilities Act. If you can modify the job so that somebody can do it under certain conditions, you have to do that as an employer. You know, Richard, a lot of people argue the military is just not in the business of doing that. To the point that Jessie made, Thomas Sparrow, who's with the Heritage Foundation, says this: the Pentagon's transgender policy is no different from its treatment of hundreds of other medically disqualifying conditions, such as bipolar disorder, asthma, or diabetes. These qualifications exist for two reasons: to ensure individuals are able to perform at the level expected and to prevent harm to higher risk individuals.
Well, thanks for having me, Shannon. Number one, transgenderism isn't a disease and it's not an illness. These are people who wake up one morning, they might be born in the body of man, but they know they're women and they transition to live that life.
But I think the point is that they need some kind of medical intervention or treatment that will have to still happen.
But it really depends on what stage of the transition that they're in. So I think you're simplifying a very complex situation, number one. And number two, according to the UCLA Law School, there's about 15,000 transgendered folks serving in our military. That makes the U.S. military the largest employer in the United States for transgendered people. And the fact that the Supreme Court made this ruling today without letting the lower courts have their say and finish the policy of it shows that this is a rejection of a whole group of Americans who want nothing more than to wake up, be happy, and have families. And beyond that, these particular 15,000 have went one step further. They want to protect our democracy. They want to protect our Constitution, and we're trying to stop them from doing that. We should be honoring these people instead of discriminating against them tonight.
Well, again, a lot of these people are going nowhere. I mean, based on the policy, so people understand it, this doesn't mean that anyone who has now presented publicly as transgender is getting kicked out of the military. So people know that's not what's happening. But two other reactions here. The Human Rights Campaign saying today's decision thrusts this administration's discriminatory agenda onto a military that clearly doesn't want it. DNC Chair Tom Perez goes to the next step. He says not only does this go against our values as Americans, it makes us less safe.
That is absurd. First of all, to serve in the military is not a right. It's a privilege. Less than 1% of this country is serving, and only 20% of our population is even qualified to serve. Just to serve, just to say you want to serve does not mean you should. First of all, the reason this was overturned is because the transgender population was going to get surgery and be able to transition while they were on active duty. Anybody who enlists now will have already had to been in that gender several years and already transitioned. So they're not discriminating. They're essentially saying you cannot come in and get off of the taxpayers and off of us and not be non-deployable. That is the key here. We're not an employment agency.
This is where I'm going to have to.
Deployed. You've never deployed.
You're absolutely right. But
I've been in the desert.
Do you know somebody who's transgendered?
Yes, I do. As a matter of fact,
have you talked to them about their transition? Many of them continue to work and live and operate during their transition. Number one, and number two, the military spends $24 million million on erectile dysfunction, and they only spend about
because
$5
that's
million.
a medical condition, actually.
And those men still
Yes.
serve, don't they? Absolutely.
Yes, it's a medical condition that is
They're
treatable.
only spending $5 million on transgendered medical
And they're
issues.
non-deployable, and they must
these
be
men and women,
replaced.
all they want to do is protect our democracy and serve. And the fact that you discriminate against them is ridiculous.
I think that's what it comes down to, is the deployability issue, regardless of what the issue is. Because a lot of people, again, thousands of people who are transgender will still be able to serve
I would
in the
agree with you
military.
normally, but all three, the former Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman, the current Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman, and the incoming Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman also all said this is not a problem. And they're not alone. 56 other generals have come out, including the head of every single military division, and said this is not a problem.
But there are other military leaders who say they now this affects the ability
none of the ones
to
that are
deploy.
running the military
This is
currently.
the
Yes, of course,
deployability
under
issue
the
on that front.
Obama administration.
Nobody in the Joint Chiefs of
Okay.
Staff.
All right. We're not going to solve it tonight, but this eventually will end up probably back at the Supreme Court, and they're going to have to take it on the merits at some point, probably. So we'll see. Thank you both for coming in and talking about it.